Hi, welcome to the second video of a series of 3 videos that I decided to put together on an empowerment approach to post-trauma growth and really looking at what empowerment actually means in the fields of therapy and coaching. I'm Nancy Forrester. I'm the founder, the executive director of the National Emotional Freedom Techniques Training Institute, where we train therapists and coaches and wellness practitioners to integrate powerful energy approaches into their toolboxes. In the first video of this series, I hope you had a chance to watch it. If not, the link is down below. We took a historical journey through the therapy coaching field's approach to trauma and looked at how originally the feeling was that the trauma is in the event itself, and that led to certain difficulties in terms of helping our clients. And so then the field moved on to an understanding that trauma is actually in the body, not in the event itself. And then most recently, really the cutting edge of where we are now is seeing that trauma is actually an energy issue, that the trauma event is about a nervous system, a energetic system not having the capacity to process the enormous amount of information that is in that event. And in its ability to survive, the body mounts a defensive reaction, part of which is to take all the information that it doesn't have the ability in that moment to process, because it simply doesn't have the capacity to run that much information through its system. It takes that information and it sections it off, it fragments it off. So inside that, what is often called a trauma capsule, we will have emotional information, we will have sensory information, we will have factual information, we will have imagery, we will have all of the information that the system wasn't able to process in the moment. And the brilliance of the nervous system and the way that we're created being to fragment that off so that it is no longer available for the system to use that information. So we talked a little bit about how that's a bit like having a riverbed with a flow of water through the river, and this trauma capsule being like a big rock in the bottom of the river, and how, depending on the capacity of the river, that rock will have different ability to disturb the flow of the information. So in terms of a human system, depending on the capacity of the energetic system, the trauma capsule, the unprocessed information from the trauma, will have different abilities to impact on the functioning of the system. So if we have a client system with a low capacity to process information, then river rocks, trauma capsules will have significant impact on their life. Whereas if we have a system which has a greater capacity to process information, a greater capacity to flow information, energy through its system, then the same size river rock is going to have a lesser disorganizing impact on the system. So then moving into this video, I'd like to present a revolutionary idea for you to think about, and that is about, well, then what does empowering a client's nervous system, what does empowering a client actually mean? And so building on what we spoke about last time, I'd like to suggest that empowering a client actually means expanding the capacity of their energetic system, which we can use the nervous system as a proxy for, because the nervous system is what's taking in all the information from the environment, all the energy from the environment. So that empowerment actually means expanding the capacity of that client's nervous system to process information. It's not to go and try to remove the rocks, which is what the therapy field has traditionally done, and the coaching field is saying, we don't want to do any of that, right? You can see that an effort to remove a rock is going to be very disturbing to the flow of the water through the riverbed. In the same way, efforts to actually go back to the trauma event and process the information of the trauma event itself is going to be very, very dysregulating to a human being today. More so, the smaller the current capacity of that nervous system, right? So just as I was talking about with the riverbed, the more the capacity of the riverbed, the less influence the river rock has. Working with a human system, the smaller the capacity of that nervous system to process information, the greater the destructive impact is going to be of going to the actual past trauma event and trying to process it. So we have a different approach here at the National EFT Training Institute. What we're doing is, rather than taking out the river rocks, we are expanding the capacity. We're expanding the amount of flow that can actually move through the system and be processed through the system, thus reducing the impact of the trauma capsule on the current life of the system. I think one of my favorite metaphors to talk about this is my beautiful trip a couple of summers ago. I had an opportunity to do a transatlantic trip from New York City over to Southampton in England. And I was a little trepidatious about what it was going to be like in the middle of the Atlantic, having heard my father, who was a sailor in World War II, having him talk about the enormous swells in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. So to my surprise and delight, I'm on the Queen Mary, a vessel which is built to cross the Atlantic. I'm in the middle of these magnificent swells, and I don't feel them at all. My journey continues to be pleasant. I'm curious about the ocean. It's quite delightful to me because the vessel has the capacity to manage the intensity of the swells. You can only imagine if I was in a lesser vehicle, I guess like my dad had been during the war, that the experience would have been much different, that there would be much more activation, fear, defensiveness in my system because the capacity of the vessel I was in was not sufficient to process the intensity of the ocean swells. So it's exactly the same in a human system, right? We are wanting to empower the client to build a vessel which has the capacity to process the life that they choose to live. You know, rather than stay in the same smaller size vessel and therefore have to stay closer to shore, right? That therefore have to manage the environment that they're in, control the environment to keep it small for fear of capsizing. So our work is actually to find our ways to very gently and steadily increase the size of the vessel and the capacity of that vessel to actually manage life, which is more more intense, right? And next time, then, in this series of videos, we'll look at another quite revolutionary idea, that it's actually the way the client is looking at their problem, which is the problem. The way, the lens with which they're looking at the problem is actually what is constraining the capacity of their system to process the information. And we'll look specifically at how conscious emotional freedom techniques gives us the ability to shift that lens and to begin building the Queen Mary with the client. Hey, thanks for being here and looking forward to speaking to you next time.